We're delighted to have you with us for our Tepper Alumni webinar series today. And today we have Professor of Economics and Senior Associate Dean Sevin Yeltekin talking on Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies, and the macroeconomy. But as we allow our alumni colleagues to check in and log in, we're going to give you a couple of announcements here. We just celebrated a record-breaking reunion here on campus, more alumni and guests than we've ever had for any alumni reunion in our history. And we're very excited now to look ahead to next year. So those of you who can start preparing, who are in the classes with a 4 or a 9, or the class of 2018 will be coming back for their one-year reunion. But it's April 12th and 13th, 2019, and we're going to have an amazing celebration. It'll be our first celebration in the new Tepper Quad. Speaking of the new Tepper Quad, we are almost ready to move in. We actually begin moving in early July and start our summer programs there, and our incoming students will be coming in August, so it'll be a wonderful time there. As you can see from the photo on the screen, the landscaping is coming in. The building looks amazing. It will now be the largest building in Carnegie Mellon's campus. Give you a few slides here that show you some of the other parts of the building, the exterior, the amazing interior atrium that is just so beautiful to see. You're going to be very impressed when you do it, and are the largest auditorium in Carnegie Mellon's campus. So lots to see in the new building, and those of you who were just back for the reunion had a chance to visit, and those of you who can come to campus would love to show you our beautiful new building. We also want to remind you we're coming to the close of our fiscal year at the Tepper School and at the university. And webinars like this are made possible because of gifts from our alumni and friends. And so we want to encourage you to make a gift if you haven't already done that by June 30th, so it counts for this fiscal year. You can just go online to tepper.cmu.edu/give and make your gift there. We also have our chapter challenges going on and our class challenges going on. So it's a wonderful time. Your participation at whatever level will make a big impact on us, allow us to continue to increase our support of our alumni community. Today, I'm really happy to be able to introduce Professor Sevin Yeltekin. As I said, she's Professor of Economics and a Senior Associate Dean for Education. She's taking on a new important leadership role here at the school and is doing a great job. She received her BA in Economics and Mathematics from Wellesley College and then went on to Stanford for her master's and PhD. She began teaching at the Tepper School in 2006. And has been just an amazing teacher here. She received the George Leland Bach Excellence in Teaching Award in 2014. And for those of you who've had her as a professor, you probably had her for emerging markets or global economics. You might have been one of our economics or undergraduate students who also had her in their introductory course when you were a student here. But she's very active in the academic field. She serves on the editorial boards of a whole host of really important organizations in economics and finance. So we're really glad to see that. And her research really focuses on macroeconomics, fiscal policy design, as well as social insurance design. She can speak on a quite broad range of topics here. So I'm always impressed with the amount of information that she has on those. She also can talk about computational economics and asset pricing implications of macro policy. So we are very happy to have her speak with you today. This will be one of our largest, if not our largest webinar. So glad for those of you here for the first time. We hope you enjoyed and hope you'll come back again. So join me in welcoming Professor Sevin Yeltekin.
Hello. Thank you, John. That was quite the... Okay, sorry, as I move. Hello, everyone. I can see quite a few of you, and I can sometimes, as the names scroll up, recognize some of my previous students. So it's very nice to, even though I can't see you, a big hello to everybody who's out there. Thanks for logging in. And today I'm going to talk about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies in general and the macroeconomy. So I'm going to take a sort of an economist, more macroeconomist point of view towards sort of what it means to have cryptocurrencies in an economy and what are some of the features of those currencies relative to the public currency that we have, such as the US dollar, and how those two things can interact. So let me go ahead and move on. All right. So one thing I want to sort of show you quickly so that you know where we're going, the roadmap. And before I describe you the roadmap, I want you to be aware of the fact that I will use cryptocurrency and type of private money or private money in general as in describing any type of currency that's not issued by a government, and cryptocurrency is certainly one of them. So first we'll go through sort of thinking about conceptually, why do we need money? In any economy, in any community, why do we need money? And what are the fundamental features of money that we want to actually have? And how well do cryptocurrencies function as money? How well do they fulfill the requirements of these features? And what are some of the problems that are very specific to cryptocurrencies that we think about as economists? And what are the macroeconomic implications, if there are any, of having cryptocurrencies either side by side with public money or replace maybe public money in the future? And so we want to know whether private and government issued currencies can coexist, and what would that world look like. So those are the things that I'm going to talk about. And so let me start with some of the basics. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a review of your sort of basic macroeconomics, money and banking class, but I think it's very important because what you're going to see is that a lot of the features and questions and problems that we try to solve with cryptocurrencies are actually not very unique to cryptocurrencies. People have been thinking about how to make medium of exchange very efficient for centuries, if not for millennia, and we'll see that cryptocurrencies have similar issues that they have to resolve and some new issues. So let's think about starting an alumni village, okay? So let's imagine that the villagers in the alumni village tend to specialize in producing certain goods and services. To make our life easy, we're going to think about sort of A, grows wheat, B, makes shoes, C, heals wounds, okay? An economist looking at this question would think, okay, how are allocations determined? In other words, how much should each villager produce or consume? Well, of course, that's going to depend on the production technology as well as what the demand for these goods are, right? Prices, what do the various goods and services cost? Again, that's going to be a culmination of the production side and the demand side. And most importantly, for this particular webinar, what are the payment systems? What objects and systems can we use to support trade between people who produce different goods and or offer different services, right? So 1 and 2 get a lot of attention. Typically, that's what a lot of economists tend to sort of concentrate on. We're going to focus actually on 3. Okay, well, there are 2 very obvious but bad candidates, right? The first one, as you know, is barter, direct exchange of goods and services. Simple enough. A gives wheat to B in exchange for shoes, but if you think about it as a relatively large village, relatively large community, finding people where the double coincidence of wants is actually sort of resolved, is going to take a lot of effort and a lot of transaction costs, right? So we can do something a little bit better than barter. We can think about it as memory, money as memory. What we'll do is actually keep a log or ledger of who owes what to whom, right? So there's no need for any physical medium of exchange. We don't really need gold coins. We don't need any other medium of exchange. But we can also sort of think about that we don't really need to immediately find the person who has the goods or services that we're seeking, who at the same time wants the goods and services that we are providing, that double coincidence of wants that's actually quite costly to accomplish. Well, if we do the memory bit, right, it even allows for credit. A, who needs shoes, can even buy shoes in the winter, because we can actually, by keeping this particular ledger or a log, we can see A doesn't want shoes right now, but he has right to buy shoes because he has actually sold wheat to somebody. Well, let's go ahead and buy the shoes in the winter. But it still requires quite a bit of management. It requires record keeping and punishment technologies, right? If A has bought shoes in the winter, is going to buy shoes in the winter and has actually used some sort of a credit system using this log system, what if he decides not to deliver, or somebody else decides not to deliver the shoes? How are we going to make sure that these sort of ledgers or logs are actually, these promises that are recorded on the logs and ledgers are actually fulfilled, right? And what if the village gets big? Let's say that we all know each other. We're part of the Tepper alumni. We all trust each other. But to be able to have access to other goods and services, we want to open up the alumni village to maybe other schools and bring their alumni. Well, do we trust them as much? Do we know as much about them? What are we going to do about trading outside of the village, right? If it gets really big and this sort of keeping of logs and ledgers becomes extremely cumbersome? So you can immediately think about sort of the issues that are arising here. Well, what else can fix the problem, right? So let's go back and review what we want to do. So A has wheat, B has shoes, and C is some sort of a doctor, heals wounds, right? What do they want? A wants shoes, B wants some wound help, and C wants wheat, right? So we can actually create something else. How about A gives a promise of wheat, okay? Writes on a piece of paper, I promise to deliver wheat, whoever has this particular IOU, and gives it to actually B. B takes this IOU and delivers shoes to A, which is what A needs. B keeps the IOU, that maybe circulates around the village or not. And then at some point when he or she wants to actually sort of get wound help, gives the promise of the wheat, the IOU, to C, and then gets wound help. So at the end of the second exchange, what do we have? We have A has shoes. He got exactly what he wanted. B got wound help, exactly what he or she wanted. Now C has a promise of wheat, a piece of paper that says that A is going to deliver wheat to C, right? And if the third exchange, this promise is fulfilled, now we have exactly what everybody wants. Then third, A gets the shoes, B gets the wound help, and C gets the wheat. Okay. In this case, we don't actually need a log. We don't need a ledger, and we don't even need any kind of physical money or anything like that to be able to do these transactions. But there's a major issue, and you can see it immediately because I've highlighted it in red, but you can immediately figure out what if B and C counterfeits A's IOU, right? We end up having B owning one and C owning one. Who's going to get the wheat, right? It's not that hard to write on a piece of paper with some copying the handwriting that you are entitled to some wheat from A. What if A is not trustworthy and will not deliver the wheat to C? And maybe A is trustworthy, but there's some rumor that A may not be trustworthy. C suspects that A may not be trustworthy. You can immediately see how this particular system, that's actually an improvement on the barter and the memory, the log, the ledger one, is going to immediately break down as well. All we need is really one person that we cannot trust in the system, and then without any double coincidence of wants or lack of trust, we need something else that's going to resolve this medium of exchange problem. So we all know that the adage that says money is the root of all evil. Kiyotaki and Moore, who are probably the most celebrated monetary economists, people who think about money in the economics profession, have one of the most cited and celebrated papers in this realm. They've sort of flipped this around, and evil, lack of trust, is the root of all money. That's why we need money, right? And so what were some of the early forms of money? People have grappled with this particular medium of exchange for a very, very long time. Going back to 3000 BC, primitive economies used goods and commodities. They used barley in Mesopotamia, salt in China, cocoa beans in the Aztec Empire. The list goes on and on, all the way up to cigarettes in German POW camps. Okay. And you can even think about if any of you have been to some sort of a resort and so on, right? You can also trade all sorts of sort of little coins and so on and so forth that has the resort's emblems on it to be able to go out and get your drink or get your food. So people have thought about how to make that medium of exchange somewhat more efficient. But there are a lot of potential issues, especially when we go to the commodity side, right? Salt, barley, cocoa beans, and so on and so forth. They're not perfectly durable. They're hard to transport in very large quantities, right? Maybe okay if you're buying shoes, but think about buying real estate, right? That's going to be extremely difficult to do. It's very hard to control the supply. Sometimes the weather cooperates and sometimes it doesn't. So you might have a lot of cocoa beans one year and not a lot of cocoa beans the next year. And if they're not durable, so you can't store it from one year to the next, so it's not a very good store of value, then you're going to run into the problem that there's going to be a lot of scarcity in one year and there's going to be maybe an abundance in the next year. So it's very hard to control the supply, right? And you're going to see in a minute why it's really important to control the supply. And this is one of the things, obviously, cryptocurrencies and all other currencies have to think about. What is the supply of this currency? And how do we make sure that it doesn't get out of hand either, so that we can think about sort of the value of this currency so we don't inflate it away completely. So then, once they realized that really a lot of the commodity stuff wasn't working that well, they evolved into using useless, perhaps decorative objects as well. So cowrie shells in Africa, whale teeth in Fiji. Most famous, if you've taken my class, you've probably seen a picture of it, is the stone rye of Yap, which are these massive, massive stones with sort of holes in them that were really actually difficult to find and difficult to transport. But the nice thing about it is that they were durable. right? And because they were hard to find, they were hard to replicate. So now we have a little bit of a control on the supply side, right? Now it's starting to look a little bit like gold and silver, that kind of money, right? But there was also some other issues. First of all, they were not uniform, right? A whale teeth and another whale teeth did not look exactly alike. So how much was each one worth, right? Do you need a big one? Do you need a small one? Do you want a slightly altered one? What would be the values of those? Can you buy the same things for them? What would be the exchange rate? What are the denominations of whale teeth? And it's not uniform and it's not perfectly divisible either, right? So which made, again, the sort of the medium, as a medium of exchange, it was a very cumbersome method to use. Then we get the metal tokens. So we started out with commodities that were not durable. We went to sort of decorative items, things that may not have a lot of sort of value, but then divisibility and uniformity became a problem. And again, scalability, because a lot of these things are very hard to transport in large quantities. So we get the metal tokens, right? So that's going to solve another problem. So they've been used since 2500 BC, gold, silver, copper, bronze, whatever they could mine at the time. Well, they're durable. They're hard to find and mine. So we've got, we get the controlled supply a little bit. They are divisible. You could have little pieces of silver and little pieces of gold. And they are uniform, right? We can weigh them and we can sort of see what their value would be. But there's still some problems. And the problem is that they're still heavy to transport in large quantities. And there's now another problem, which is counterfeiting. The more valuable these stores of value of medium exchange becomes, like gold, the harder they become to mine. Counterfeiting, in the case of metal objects, clipping they called it, because people would take sort of pieces of it out, became a huge, and then combine them together from different coins to make, coins on the side, because they could melt them very easily. So this became an issue. So counterfeiting is starting to make an appearance here because these are now really in scarce supply. So when you think about cryptocurrencies, when you think about Bitcoins, counterfeiting is one of the issues that they have to grapple. Divisibility is not so much of an issue because we're talking about sort of a computer file and we can go all the way to sort of the fourth digit, 5th digit, 8th digit after the decimal. But there's going to be some other issues that come up. Then we come to actually a particular point called privately issued paper money. Now we've moved from sort of, very hard to mine objects, very hard to find objects onto paper money. Now that's going to solve the problem that it's going to be easy to transport, right? You can go even with cash. Now it seems sort of unreasonable to us, but you can go and do your shopping with a wad of cash in your wallet, right? But the way that it worked is that it was actually a claim to metal deposit. So what you would do is there would be a depository institution, right? A bank, let's call it gold, where you would go and deposit your gold. They would keep it as safekeeping, and then they would give you some paper money, right? And the paper money was basically like an IOU. So it says payable to bearer. So during the free banking era, especially in the United States, which was between 1837 and 1862, state banks exactly did this. They issued money backed by specie. In that case, a lot of times it was usually gold. Okay, and then they went to sort of a gold and silver because the gold supplies were too little, but we won't spend too much time on that. It was much easier to transport than metal, but it still had problems. Why? Well, first of all, if everybody issued sort of paper money, what was the exchange rate between them, right? It became very hard to spot counterfeits. If somebody came out of state and said, hey, this is a California dollar from a bank in California, can I really tell whether it's authentic or not? So counterfeiting is a major, major issue. How much do you trust the issuer? Because it's the payable to the bearer. Where do I go to redeem it? And when I show up to redeem it, am I going to get a piece of gold or a piece of silver back, right? And how far and do I have to travel to be able to do that? How costly is it to get to this bank and redeem? So people have done a lot of analysis about this and have realized that the exchange rate between different types of private money at this time was very much correlated with actually how far different banks were, right? So I certainly would like to have a Pittsburgh bank issued fiat currency because I can easily go ahead and redeem it. If somebody gave me a California one, well, when is the next time you're going to travel to California or find somebody else in Pittsburgh who's willing to accept the California money? So we went through a phase which was called obviously the free banking period. So if we just summarize what we've seen so far, there are fundamental frictions, what we call frictions, right? Things that make the market system not function 100%. That's what we call frictions in economics. These frictions were things like double coincidence of wants, right? and lack of record keeping. They gave to rise to a medium of exchange, right? We thought we could sort of resolve this with barter, not very efficient. It became very difficult. We can certainly store things. We could do it with record keeping. That had issues of trust. So after all of these, basically millennia of trials and errors, we realized that there are certain desirable properties of a medium of exchange. It should be durable. It should be divisible. It should be transportable. It should be uniform. It should be recognizable so that it's not easily counterfeited. It should be scarce, right? People should not be able to just generate because then the value of it would go down to zero. It should have some sort of a steady supply, unlike the cocoa beans or some other commodities that we have to grow, or wheat. We shouldn't have such fluctuations year after year or season after season for this particular currency. And it should be hard to counterfeit, right? So we've tried a lot of these things, from the commodity money to the metal coins to the privately issued banks. So now where are we now, right? Before the cryptocurrencies come into the picture, what have we been using? We've been using government issued fiat currency. Fiat currency is intrinsically worthless, right? That piece of paper that you have in your wallet it really doesn't take much to produce a $100 bill. It's, I think, about 8 cents. It's a byproduct. The US dollar feels really nice. It washes really well because it's actually a cotton byproduct. That's why if you wash it in your jeans in the washing machine, it doesn't come out totally destroyed. And it's very easy to produce in terms of the cost, 8 cents, right? Obviously, we want to make sure that, with all the watermarks and so on, counterfeiting is not really that easy, but it's not a precious metal. US government has issued national currency since 1863. It has been backed by nothing, absolutely nothing, no gold, no other commodity since 1971, since we basically abandoned Bretton Woods, right? So it's a bubble. It's a bubble. We all believe that it's going to work, and therefore it works, right? And has most of the desirable properties, right? What are these divided? It's divisible. It's hard to counterfeit. It's a good store of value, right? And it's scarce because only government gets to issue it. But keeping the supply, we've had a lot of sort of banking system problems in the past. We're keeping the supply really steady. We've done a good job lately, but the Federal Reserve System, which was established in 1913, had to learn how to do that very well, depending on what was happening in the economy, in the financial system, and so on, right? And more recently, we have electronic or virtual trades, right? Such as debit cards and credit cards, but they're run by trusted third parties that the government approves, and they're backed by government-issued currency, right? That's the system that we operate in now. So now we come to cryptocurrencies, okay? And some obvious questions will arise. How well do cryptocurrencies fulfill the roles of money that we've just discussed, right? That is medium of exchange, right? Is it divisible? Is it uniform? Is it recognizable, right? All of the things. Is it in scarce supply? Is it a good unit of account? Is it a good store of value? Is it going to lose its value by the time I wake up tomorrow morning and I can't go out and buy even a loaf of bread, right? Which aspects have we seen before of cryptocurrencies that we've just even discussed very briefly and very quickly in the last 10 minutes? Which aspects are new? And what are some of the potential problems? Before I go into this, we've prepared a very simple poll for you to answer, just so that we know sort of where your beliefs lie. So we have a little poll, and we would like to know if you have ever invested in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency. So we're waiting for the polls to come in. And the second question is, do you believe that new cryptocurrencies are a valid alternative to our current system? So we'll wait a minute. I suppose the numbers are coming in. Okay. So I think the numbers might be coming in, but we have a good sense of what the audience is doing. With respect to the first question, have you invested in Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency? 80%, a little above 80% has said no, and about 20% has said yes. Do you believe that the new cryptocurrencies are a valid alternative to our current system? It's almost split in half. Yes is 47%, 46%. No is 54%, which is kind of aligned with the fact that, not many of you have invested in cryptocurrencies. So, it's good to be skeptical. And we're going to talk a little bit about why an economist like me who worries about national scale sort of currency would be somewhat skeptical. But there's going to be some good things as well that we're going to discuss. So the features of cryptocurrencies that we've just discussed and we've seen before in other forms of money is exactly how do I validate transactions, right? How do I validate? How do I make sure that John really paid me that Bitcoin, right? Have really paid me that Ethereum, right? So we have a lot of, the nice thing is that with cryptography, the advances in technology and then computer science and so on, there's a very ingenious solution to these where we can have digital signature that can authenticate transactions. We can think about resolving issues such as, what if John spends more than he actually has? What if he double spends, right? And then he won't be able to fulfill his promises. So we can sort of bake into this validation of the transaction some sort of a feasibility and a settlement protocol. We can validate the ledger, right? To be able to make sure that we're preventing counterfeiting. But there's going to be some transaction costs as well. We all know that cryptocurrencies right now, in terms of sort of the volume of transactions that they can process, let's say per second or per day or per hour, is not anywhere near Visa. But those transaction costs, given with the advances in technology and with trial and error, hey, Visa has been around for 60 years, has had a lot of time, 6 decades to be able to perfect its technology. Give it maybe a couple of more decades and cryptocurrencies will be up there as well. And maybe these transaction costs are going to come down. And we also know the feature we've seen before in our little alumni village is that this is all very fragile, right? We all have to agree that these cryptocurrencies are valuable. If I don't accept it for whatever John wants to buy from me, then he's not going to be able to do this transaction. It's going to be worthless if nobody wants to accept these, right? And that's an equilibrium we have to all agree on to play without really a sort of an authority coming down and hitting me on the head and saying, you must accept John's cryptocurrency. You must accept his Bitcoin and teach him some economics as a service, right? So, or we accept your Bitcoin for our tuition. So we don't have an authority who's going to come down and say that, right? We all have to agree and trust that. Why do we trust it? Well, we hope that it's going to be valuable. So I take John's Bitcoin, and then if my AC broke down, it's quite hot in Pittsburgh these days, and I'm waiting actually for somebody to show up. So I can pay him with a Bitcoin. So I can trade it for other services and goods that I can. But if I think that at some point that cryptocurrency is not going to be acceptable, that the government is going to come crashing down on its on regulation, and that cryptocurrency is not going to be widely used, the whole thing is going to unravel, right? As it unravels, it's going to be sort of useless even today, before we even get to the stage where the government crackdown happens. So this is not unique to cryptocurrencies. We can wipe out the US dollar if we can coordinate on wiping it out, if we decide that we're no longer going to accept it as a form of payment for goods and services, right? But, it didn't, okay. How does a government validate currency? Well, the way that the government validate currency, the way that the government, even if John doesn't want to take my dollar or I don't want to take his dollar, right? One thing I can do with my dollar is go and settle any public debt I have. And the most obvious public debt is any taxes that I owe. So if you take your dollar, right, and if you look at it, there's going to be a little line right here, that's going to say that basically, let's see if I can get this to work, okay? This note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. Now, private, you can decide not to accept the US dollar. You can say, hey, I want a stone from the island of Yap. I can't do anything about it, right? But at least I can go ahead and pay my taxes. And that's the way that the government is going to validate the currency. So even if the government validates and accepts this as a form of payment, when it comes to private payments, right? There's really no way other than a consensus, right? We hear this with cryptocurrencies, a consensus amongst us that we want to accept this dollar bill. Features of cryptocurrencies we have not seen before are things like there's no central authority that backs or validates transactions, right? It's a public ledger owned by everyone, and the ledger consensus is reached by, in the case of the Bitcoin, proof of work. And now we have proof of stake, such as Neo and Dash, and other types of ledger consensus protocols are coming online as well, right? As we sort of perfect this technology and think about sort of, what are some of the disadvantages to, let's say, proof of work. And proof of work creates risk for miners, okay? winner take all reward system is what that is. And if you're a risk averse miner, hey, I'm an economist. Incentives are how we work, right? If I'm a risk averse miner, what am I going to do? I'm going to diversify and pool resources as share mining rewards, right? Because if I'm going to put so much energy, and really literally energy, because we're going to use a lot of electricity, if we're going to put so much energy and so much coding power, so much server power into trying to find that hash, then hey, might as well pull our resources together and then share the rewards. That's what sort of people responding to these incentives would be, and that's exactly what we see currently. About 4 mining pools hash more than 61% of all blocks and share the rewards. Yeah. Proof of work is not only risky, and then we see this sort of, the whole idea, one of the ideas at least behind a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin was that it would be less it would be more a social good, right? That we would be able to go ahead and mine and get ourselves a Bitcoin, and it wouldn't be about power, political power or economic power and so on and so forth. Except the reality of it, that's not how it works anymore, right? At least the Bitcoin part of it is that there are these sort of mining pools that generate and use a lot of power that have become very concentrated hubs of Bitcoin mining. Global mining costs are over $2 billion per year. That's more energy consumption per year than the country of Ireland and the country of Denmark. Right? By construction, the costs will continue to rise. That's how Bitcoin algorithm works, that it's going to become costlier and costlier to solve that particular mathematical equation and to be able to get a reward, right? So as it becomes more and more costly to mine the Bitcoin, we're going to see more market concentration in the miners. Maybe it's not going to be 4 mining pools anymore. Maybe it's going to be 2 mining pools, right? Will a cryptocurrency continue to be valued in future if its costs continue to rise? Right? That's exactly the kind of the scale at which an economist would think about some of the things associated with it. What about as a store of value, right? One of the things that we worry about with respect to any kind of, when we were talking about barley versus cocoa beans, right? As store of value, they were not very good because they might go rotten and then we're not going to be able to use it the next period or the next month. As a store of value, we also don't want their value to actually, fluctuate too much. If you look at gold in the past 12 months, from this webinar day, the standard deviation with respect to the mean, that's the annual percentage deviation, is 12%. So gold is pretty risky. Bitcoin in the past 12 months, that standard deviation is 60%, right? You've all seen, also, this is not a great slide because it's a little bit mushed together, but you can just look at the graphs. These are the different types of cryptocurrencies. And if you look at one of the columns over here, I don't know if you can see it very well. For example, if I look at EOS, just over the last 24 hours, change in price was about 12.32%. And I think I downloaded this about a week ago, right? And so there's huge variability in the price, right? As an asset, maybe you want to take on that risk, that's fine. But as a medium of exchange, you've got a problem. As a store of value, you've got a problem. I want to wake up the next morning, take my dollar bill and go get that cup of coffee. I don't want to have a dollar bill and say, oh no, now it's worthless, right? It's actually worth 1 cent compared to yesterday's dollars, and now I can't buy the things that I want. So what I want to do is not hold on to it at all as a medium of exchange. Maybe as an asset because I'm taking on a lot of risk and I want a high return, maybe sell it high. That's a different matter. But as money, it's not going to be great. So this is obviously, you might have probably seen this, most of you, is the Bitcoin price. It started in 2009. Its price was 0. It took a little while to get going, pretty much until 2012, 2013. And then you see that huge convex rise where it peaked in December of 2017 at about $19,000, over $19,000. And again, when I downloaded this price on May, towards the end of May on 2018, the price had gone down to $88,000, and I think it's circulating around 7,500 right now. Since I downloaded the slide and made my chart, it's actually come down in price. So that's a huge amount of volatility where we worry about that, right? Scalability is another thing that we worry about economics, right? When you look at sort of, transaction speeds compared to Visa and PayPal, we can make 24,000 transactions right? In cryptocurrencies with respect to the speed of in Visa, that's 24,000, Ripple 1,500, PayPal 193, right? When we come to some of the other Bitcoins, you can see that it's making about sort of, 7 transactions or so. So there's a scalability. But again, I'm less worried about this one because as the technology improves, right? Barring huge energy costs, we can actually, again, Visa, we can probably close the gap. And Visa has been around for 60 years. They had a lot of time and a lot of ability to perfect their system, right? So some important questions still remain, right? We've talked about sort of the obvious features of cryptocurrencies that people who are in cryptocurrency world, who are thinking about protocols, who are thinking about the technology behind it, are trying to resolve. But from an economist point of view, I still worry about a variety, a host of questions. I'm not going to answer all of these. I've just sort of posted them here. These are the kind of the unresolved, most basic questions you would ask every time you would have some sort of a currency. Will it have price stability? Will it drive other currencies in the market, including other cryptocurrencies? Can one of the cryptocurrencies drive other cryptocurrencies out of the market? Do they require commodity fiat backing, right? We have Tether who's sort of claiming now that it's going to be 100% backed by fiat currency. Do we need that, right? Is it required? Is it desirable? Will the market provide the socially optimum amount of money, which I'm going to come to in a second because that's a very important question. Can cryptocurrencies and a government issued money compete? Can they coexist? Right? Should governments tax them? Should governments moderate them? Should governments do something else? But doesn't that now go against sort of why we established cryptocurrencies to begin with, which is to sort of have it separated from a centralized authority? So there's a lot of questions to answer, which we're not going to get to. But let me show you a couple of things that economists do worry about. In any type of money, there is a tension between a store of value and a medium of exchange, right? Store of value means something actually holds its value. I have $1 today and it's still $1, worth $1. I can still buy the same good that I can buy today with my dollar. Gold and Bitcoin as sort of as stores of value. Yeah, they're very erratic, but if you've invested in it early enough, you've done still pretty well, right? Gold and Bitcoin appreciate because of the slow growth of mining supply, right? That's already sort of capped, especially with respect to Bitcoin. So it's not a huge surprise. The volatility is something else, but the fact that it appreciates over time is the fact that there is already a cap in supply, and that's already baked into the algorithm of the Bitcoin. Fiat currencies like the US dollar are much more practical as mediums of exchange because at the end of the day, I really don't want you to hold on to that dollar. I want you to go out and spend it because you holding on to the dollar doesn't create wealth, doesn't create GDP for me, right? As an economist, I want you to spend that dollar. I want you to be able to rely on that dollar as a store of value and a medium of exchange because it's going to facilitate economic activity and including investment and consumption. But by having a little bit of inflation, by having it lose value is actually a good thing. It's by design. Right? The reason we issue a little bit more money every year than we absolutely need to, because I want you to go ahead and spend that. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for you, and it's a good thing for me, okay, as a policymaker. Strong stores of value, like the Bitcoin or the gold, they actually encourage hoarding. People don't want to spend it. They want to wait until it peaks and maybe send it then. That leads to deflation and actually leads to financial instability, right? They can also make poor units of account and methods of deferred payment. But most importantly, what it does is that it actually sort of prevents one of its main purposes from happening, which is as a medium of exchange, right? So if you look at the money stock in the United States, this is from 1988, we have two different types of money. M1 is more liquid. It'd be everything that's cashed and in your checking accounts. M2 has a little bit more of your savings accounting. But these are, you can write a check. You can go use your ATM card, take this money out, pay at the cash register with your debit card, right? And withdraw money from these accounts or just purely use cash. And as you can see, the money stock has been rising. That's not because the Federal Reserve doesn't know what it's doing. It's because it's done by design. I want you to rely on that dollar, but I want you to go ahead and spend it. Right? I want you to turn that into some sort of productive investment or consumption in the economy. Bitcoin, on the other hand, as you can see, is designed to be capped. right? I don't remember the exact year, maybe 2022, where it's going to reach its cap. It's becoming harder and harder to mine. That means there's going to be deflation in the economy. If we just replaced all of the US dollar and any other currency in the economy with the Bitcoin, there would be deflation. And deflation, if anybody remembers what happened to Japan in the 1990s and 2000s, it is not a good thing. People hoard money. People don't want to invest, right? Economic activity comes to a halt. You really don't want that. So that's one of the undesirable features of the Bitcoin or some of the other cryptocurrencies that are capped. It's great for store of value, right? If it's capped and I own one of these things and not many other people are going to be able to buy it, it's fantastic. Price goes up, however erratic, right? But from an economic perspective, economic activity as a medium of exchange, it's not desirable at all. The other thing is convertibility, right? When you own a Bitcoin, what do you really own, right? Where does it live? Is it backed by anything? No, not really. Is a blockchain a bank, right? Like that A who had that IOU, right? Gave an IOU to B, got the shoes and said to B, go ahead and give this to the doctor in the village and he'll heal your wounds and then he can come and redeem the wheat from me. He was actually acting as a depository institution. He was acting as a bank, right? Cryptocurrencies do not act as banks. They're not tied to credit, which is what fiat currency is, right? So there isn't a depository institution because they're not tied to credit and they're not backed up by some sort of fiscal backing like the US dollar is. Because why? If there's a run on Bitcoin, if there's some speculative attack on the Bitcoin, right, its price can go down to zero. There's no way that even the Bitcoin people who might have some reserves on the side, this is, who might want to pay out the first people who want to go ahead and redeem their Bitcoin. Well, governments have a lot more. They can print money. They can tax people, right? They can actually make liquid injections to banks who have bankrupts. But we don't have that system for cryptocurrencies, which makes them a lot more fragile in certain ways, right? You don't have FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance. You don't really have the other informal guarantee, like too big to fail. Maybe when it gets big enough, we'll get that. You don't have a lender of last resort, which is the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve, hey, it's 8 cents for $100. Go print. They don't even do that now. They just change a ledger, right? They just all sort of digital accounting. So that's one of the issues that we have to sort of resolve with respect to thinking about cryptocurrency at a national scale. One of the features of cryptocurrency, as you've seen, especially if you look at Bitcoin, how much you can mine and its total amount is already capped. The supply is already determined. It doesn't respond to demand. A good medium of exchange, a good sort of supply of money doesn't work that way. It needs to adjust to demand. Think about it this way. You have a very, very nice restaurant that's just taking off, right? People are coming in trying to buy stuff and you just don't have enough cash in the till to be able to do transactions. People get frustrated and they don't want to buy your product anymore. As your business grows, you need that liquidity to be able to do transactions, right? With respect to cryptocurrencies, let's take the Bitcoin as an example, since I know more about it and supply is capped. It's going to be a huge problem because as the demand for these currencies grow, as economic activity using these grow, you have to think about how to adjust the supply. Because if you don't adjust the supply, you're suppressing economic activity and you're making a huge variance in the price of things, right? People are going to come in and want to buy my restaurant dinner for a huge amount of money, huge amount of value, and other times they're not going to show up at all, right? Cryptocurrencies are also subject to self-fulfilling inflation-deflation phenomenon, just like fiat currencies. Just because we've found a technological solution to something doesn't mean that we've made it immune to speculative attacks or to runs, right? So the value of any of these currencies can actually go to zero, and it can go to zero in the drop of a hat as well. Cryptocurrencies or any private money supply that's based on maximizing value does not provide socially optimal amount of money. This is very important from an economist's point of view, which means the supply of money in the economy will be inefficient, which again means the type of transactions, the amount of consumption, investment, trade that we want to really do as a society will be actually hampered because the amount of money in the economy will not match the socially desirable amount of money. What do I mean by that? We have an example. This is the gold standard and GDP economic volatility. So I don't know if you can see it, but here's the gold standard. And then we have the Bretton Woods, and finally we go to a floating dollar that's not backed at anything, right? Correlation is not causality. You're all Tepper alumni, you know that, right? So I'm not going to try to sell you any of that. But this is a display of actually work that have been done for many, many years, huge amounts of literature showing that actually when you have these commodity-backed types of money or pegged exchange rates, which is what the Bretton Woods system is, you actually impart a lot of volatility because you cannot adjust the demand of liquidity, the demand of money with respect to the amount of economic activity that comes along. So one of the reasons why we wanted to float the US dollar and most of these other currencies is because we want to give it a chance. We want to bring that economic activity volatility down. So you have on the y-axis here GDP volatility in the US, and you can see that it has come down significantly since we abandoned any type of fixed exchange rate system. Right? So can they coexist, right? I've talked about sort of the great features of cryptocurrencies, that it does the medium exchange. You all probably have heard about it. This is sort of what gets talked a lot about in the news. And I've also introduced you to some of the issues that we have to think about when we sort of start to scale up and think about it as really an alternative to currency and not just a payment system that we do amongst a small group of people or a commodity that we invest in, right? So one nice feature of any cryptocurrency, they're going to provide competition to any kind of government-backed money. What does that mean? Think about, first of all, governments who are like emerging markets where there's low government trust or authority, right? Where they already have in their own, think Zimbabwe, right? Think sort of, Greece if they weren't in the Euro system, right? Think about these governments that are defaulting, like Argentina. So in these cases, you might want actually a cryptocurrency as an alternative because they're going to make sure, even if they're not providing the socially optimal amount of currency in the economy, they're going to be a great alternative to these sort of much more volatile and problematic government-issued fiat currencies. But even in countries such as the United States, where default and sort of lack of trust in the government is not a huge issue, it's going to actually act as some sort of a disciplining device. Because I can switch to Bitcoin or Ethereum or some other cryptocurrencies, central banks better make sure they get money and liquidity supervision right, that they provide good money in time along with demand and not stifle economic activity because there's these other means of payments and mediums of exchange that I can use. So that can actually increase welfare in an economy, right? And the reason that cryptocurrencies are not necessarily going back to the sort of the social optimal thing, money is a public good, right? It's just like defense, national defense. It's like roads and parks, like police forces. Private provision of money that is based on trying to maximize seigniorage, the money you make by mining, right, or by entrepreneurs, is not going to provide the social optimum amount of money. Just like a competitive market is not going to give you national defense or roads and airports. Okay, so there is that friction in these markets where they don't function like wheat markets. They don't function like shoe markets. There's a public provision of good, and money is one of those public goods where we do need some sort of kind of intervention from an authority that has the ability to tax, that has the ability to impart resources to correct that externality, right? But that doesn't mean they cannot coexist. So cryptocurrencies can and help discipline public money management. And that is all.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We're going to open it up now for questions. And as our alumni log in their questions,
Okay.
I want to ask you first, CMU is the #1 computer science school in the world, and a lot is happening here. Can you talk about what's happening here at Tepper and at CMU related to cryptocurrencies and the research in this area?
So there are a couple of things happening. One of them, just sort of as application, and some of you may have seen it if you've logged onto our website recently, with the help of, with our business technologies faculty, Param Singh, and the PNC Center for Financial Innovation, which he heads, and Dean Krishnan at the policy school at Heinz, we've actually had a competition where students had to design a CMU coin. and they did a fantastic job. So the idea is now to develop the CMU coin further and use it as a test bed, use CMU as a test bed. So we're going to use them for transactions within CMU, and we're hoping that the Tepper quad will be one of the first places where we can actually use the CMU coin, maybe to buy, bottles of water and our coffee from the exchange. So it's a great place because, we have the people who understand and develop the technology. We have the sort of the people who understand the finance part of it, the business part of it. We have economists who have to think about sort of how will this market work if we introduce this kind of coin into the mix. So there's a whole variety of things going on, and it's a great place to sort of use as a test bed. The other thing that's happening is that a lot of our faculty, both in finance and in business technologies and also in economics, are working on these issues. And most of the time, they're working on issues like the kinds that I have raised, that list of questions that I have raised. What is the right way to design a cryptocurrency that is immune from, not maybe counterfeiting, which is what maybe the CS folks will worry about, but how do we actually design a currency that is more immune to, let's say, speculative attacks or runs on, without having to provide some sort of the equivalent of FDIC, of Federal Deposit Insurance. So there's a lot of exciting. We have new faculty members teaching a fintech class where they discuss cryptocurrencies. That's a brand new class. We're now opening it up to a whole variety of constituents. And I work on other fintech type of things. So it's becoming sort of mainstream, and there's a lot of exciting new stuff coming out of both Tepper and the rest of CMU, both on the finance business side and also on the technology side. So stay tuned.
There were a couple questions on mining, and maybe you could explain basically what mining means and what the global mining supply is.
Okay, so again, I'm sure there's some of you. I can see that there's about 369 people logged in. There's some of you who's going to understand the minutia of the technology behind the mining and so on very easily. But what at the base of it, what you're doing with mining is that you basically want to control the supply of this Bitcoin, right? What does mining mean? Mining really, I mean, it sounds like somebody's going to go into the trenches and pull out some sort of gold, but it's the virtual equivalent of that, right? So mining means there is a mathematical equation that I have to solve to be able to actually add a transaction to a ledger, right? We talked about the ledgers where we keep track of who owes what and who's made which transactions and who has how many Bitcoins, and that ledger lives publicly, right? So that both John can look at it, I can look at it, Kara can look at it, and we can say, yep, that's right. Sevin paid John, and now John has that Bitcoin, and it can't be replicated. So for us to be able to sort of add transactions to that blockchain, so that to make sure that we are actually adding and keeping track of these transactions, right, there is incentives. And that incentive is that if you are able to add that transaction, right, and then a consensus is reached that, yes, you have found the solution to that mathematical problem, which gives you the right to add that particular transaction onto the blockchain, you'll be rewarded for your efforts, because as we've seen, it takes a lot of both sort of brain computational effort and energy to be able to do that. Then you're given some Bitcoin determined by an algorithm. As we go through time, that's where the supply was capped, the reward actually comes down a little bit. And sometimes when a transaction takes place and I want somebody else, because transactions are coming in all the time, right? John might be verifying some of them. I am trying to verify some of them. Some of them might be sort of staying still and not really being verified by anybody who has the technology to be able to do this mathematical computation. I want to give you a little bit of incentives to basically record my transactions, so I can pay you in Bitcoin a particular type of fee as well. So it's a system of payment. Think about, there are accountants living in places, all over the world, who are verifying all of these transactions. And every time they do, you give them a particular award, and that award is in Bitcoin. So that's what a miner is.
Okay, we have a question from Mark. He said, what needs are not being satisfied with fiat currencies other than anonymity? What benefit do the cryptocurrencies bring? Why are we seeing them come out now?
Actually, if you think about sort of what are the needs that are not being satisfied with fiat money that a cryptocurrency can easily answer, I would say that there aren't many. Fiat money has done really, really well, especially in economies like the United States, where there is an independent central bank and there is definitely sort of a big, good fiscal backing behind it. So we don't have, episodes of huge amounts of inflation and sort of, and then we have institutions in place such as the FDIC that protects people's deposits. So there isn't really that much about fiat money. People don't like the fact that there's a government involved that actually sort of, is the only issuer of that medium of exchange. So that's one of the things that doesn't seem very palatable to certain people. Although, again, if you have the right institutions, that's not such a big concern, hasn't been a big concern in the United States. So with respect, but as I've said, what happens is that by providing some sort of an alternative of a medium of exchange, cryptocurrencies can actually help discipline the fiat currency, can even improve upon it. Not only it provides an alternative form of medium of exchange and a store of value, it actually also can help discipline currencies. And if you're living in places like Argentina and Zimbabwe and so on, you better hope there's some cryptocurrency around because those currencies are not doing so well.
Well, speaking of internationally, Daniel's calling in from Mexico, and he said, I agree with your closing statements. However, do you believe that perhaps in the larger scale of time, could crypto come to be the dominant form of exchange?
Could it become the dominant form of exchange? Sure. I don't, if as long as it can react to demand, right? Because one of the reasons why you're still going to have, you're going to still want some sort of government issued fiat currency, not because you want to sort of just for the sake of having some sort of political power and so on, because just like roads and just like national defense, you're correcting a market failure, right? In the sense that a competitive market is not going to supply the right amount. If cryptocurrencies can do that, can actually get as close to the social optimum as possible, and there's a way to do that actually, and I'll say that in a minute. If they can do that, they can replace government-backed money. There's no reason why they shouldn't do. But right now, they need to resolve that issue. How would it happen? Cryptocurrencies, even if they're being issued by an entrepreneur who wants to maximize his seigniorage value, which is the money you make by issuing money. All right, you've probably seen that in your economics or macroeconomics classes. 8 cents to print $100. You sell $100 and you get $100 worth of goods. You can see how you've made, $99.92 right there. So that's seigniorage, right? And that seigniorage is going to be very motivating for people to issue cryptocurrencies, but it's not going to be what the society desires, right? So the government would come in just like they would do with national defense and do that correction. Now, if cryptocurrencies are actually turned around and used and backed by productive investments. Now we're getting into credit. We haven't tied cryptocurrencies to credit yet in the economy. But if they get tied, then that's when I think they can be completely successful as a, single alternative to fiat currency.
We only have time for one last question. There are a large number of cryptocurrencies that exist, and it seems to be more new ones are being created almost every day. As the sector matures, do you foresee consolidation in the number of currencies? And could there be a limitless supply of cryptocurrencies that are developed rather than this enforced scarcity?
I mean, that's a very good question, right? As we go through this, we're trying to, so where would a limitless supply, limitless, we can define that, but where would a large supply? They would have to have differentiating factors. You would want to prefer, Ethereum to Bitcoin for some reason, because I don't know, the transaction ease is different or something like that. So you really need to have differentiated market so that you can segment the market of people who want to use this as a medium of exchange. Then sure, a whole variety of cryptocurrencies can survive. If though, once the technology gets up there so that the transaction costs are kind of, it have become homogeneous, they're sort of harmonized, they're the same, and cryptocurrencies start looking a lot like one another, and they all have sort of somewhat resolved some of the issues with sort of counterfeiting and so on and so forth to this pretty much the same degree, then I don't see a very big reason why a limited supply would exist. Then you would see definitely consolidation, because there would be no need for one to exist when another dominant one is in the picture.
And since we don't have a limitless amount of time, we want to thank Professor Yeltekin for her time today, and we hope that you've appreciated this webinar today and look forward to our future webinars. We will be sending out a copy of the webinar video, so you'll be able to see this and look at it and study it a little bit more. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all your support. Hope to see you at one of our summer receptions around the country this summer or at one of our other alumni events. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.